So Prasanna, the other day I was at a restaurant and there were these kids. It was an open dining restaurant, nice garden. There were a lot of these terraces. So there were these kids who created their own game that they had to jump around, complete a loop and come back, and whoever comes first is the winner. So it was an unsaid rule. Nobody probably would have even set the uh, a rule or anything, but I was just an observer to this table next to us where there was a large group. And then there were these 3 or 4 kids, maybe in their 4 or 5 years age, and they were running. Now, one kid was somewhere in the front or almost in the front, and he tripped and fell. He was about to get up quickly and still run and not give up. But when he fell, he the other kids laughed, and in that laughter, you could see there was a experience of failure, but the pain also amplified. So when the pain amplified and he couldn't also win, there was a sense of guilt, and in that guilt there is a sense of failure. So essentially there is failure, pain, shame, guilt, and again repeat, where you again fail, you experience failure, and that kind of starts building up in a way. The point of contention here is that in failure, we generally tend to associate these other emotions of pain, shame, and guilt. And we assume, therefore, that failure equals to all of these 3 emotions. We cannot distinguish failure as an event from ourselves. In an event, we may have failed, but a lot of times our association is that we identify ourselves as a failure rather than failing at something. And that sort of starts building up in our childhood. So I was really wondering, how does this start getting constructed? A, this is point of the conversation. B is, how do we look at failure in general, typically? And C is, how can we deal with it? That's our conversation for today. So you can start and then we will take it.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic, Shantesh. And when it comes to specifically failure, I think the connect which especially people in the sports arena, in the area of sports, they have a very strong relationship with failure. Because if you see, we hear the names of people when it comes in the sports section in the newspaper or on the television or radio about their victory. And that happens maybe 10 times or 15 times for an Olympic athlete, you can say, or maybe 5 times, or maybe for some people it is only once in a whole lifetime. For many people it is once in a whole lifetime. So one time is the victory, but they might have lost hundreds and thousands of times. So in a sportsman's life or a sports person's life, I think the number of failures are many, many times more than their number of victories. And they have no stoppage because of those failures. Rather, they take it as a learning, they get the things which they are missing, they work on the gaps, and they keep going towards a next goal. And sometimes they try to break their own records. So that, I think, is a very powerful relationship. So when you said about this story, what comes to my mind is when this gets developed, so the relationship is not stronger, because I think that we give a lot of weightage to social validation and what people think, or maybe more than social validation, our own evaluation, which in our mind, we assume that people will be thinking like this. Maybe it is not the case, but we assume that. And that assumption can be very dangerous, is what I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you are saying this about the sports person's experience, one incident which I was recollecting from my childhood is that we used to play gully cricket, and I was probably 4 or 5 years old, my earliest sort of memories of playing cricket. And I had just played like first ball and I went out. So I came crying, and my father was sitting in the veranda. He saw me and he said, "You shouldn't cry. Like, everybody will get out. Sometimes you will play well, sometimes you will not play well, and you shouldn't cry and then come out of the game, and you are not going to throw the ball to the next batsman and all of that. You have to allow the other person also to play, and that's the trait of a sportsman. So Sportsmanship should be there, is what his line was. So take everything sportively. And what sportively is, I did not understand the meaning of that for the longest time. Maybe I thought, okay, that's part of the game, so you just play. But sportively is that you also take it without giving it too much of significance. You just take it a little casually, lightly, and then move on. And I think that becomes really important, both in failure as well as when you win. You don't give too much of significance.
Absolutely. So, and as you said, that was kind of, again, I was re-looking at the point which we were discussing, that uh, even in sports or games where there are multiple players involved, a victory may not be your individual victory. Sometimes your performance is not as good as the others, and you, even though the team wins, you may feel that what contribution I have done, or have I really done it in the right way. And especially in today's world, in cricket especially, we see that happening a lot when people discuss or they take one particular player, and then there is a lot of diagnosis and post-mortem of their performance happens. So I think the whole relationship with failure is what matters the most. And if we have a strong relationship with failure, the number one advantage of that is we will have a strong relationship with taking action. Because when we allow ourselves to do mistakes and fail, only then we take action. Otherwise, as that famous cliched proverb goes, that the ship will then always be on the shore if you don't want to risk it getting sunk sometimes, or getting whatever other bad things which may happen to a ship. But if it doesn't go in the water, then there is no point of having that ship in the first place.
That's right. And when you mentioned about failure and the association with it, I was just also remembering the example of Dhoni, because I was also earlier mentioning about not giving too much of significance to both failure and winning. And there is a sense of equanimity when you observe Dhoni on the field. And he was in one of the conversations in some PR event, probably, he was mentioning that there were moments when he felt like giving up, but any opportunity struck, even if it was by for playing cricket with tennis ball, he would go and play that, for the simple reason that just simply enjoyed the game of cricket, or any sport for that matter. So any opportunity struck, he would be there. So I think when the significance is to the game rather than winning or losing, you automatically, that equanimity is a byproduct. Therefore, it's again
Yeah,
postmortem of a sports person's experience, but essentially the significance a lot of times we associate with failure or winning. But instead, if it is on the activity and the joy and the sense of satisfaction that that activity gives us, then everything else doesn't really matter.
absolutely. And so when you are open for playing, you are open for failure, which means you are open to be ridiculed. Maybe you are open to be made fun of. So you are opening up for that vulnerability. And I think in today's world, or maybe in any time, to be a good leader or a great leader, if you see people around, I think they have all taken that step of being vulnerable, of taken that step of expressing themselves in spite of what people may think. Some things have worked, some things have not worked for them. But I think taking that step becomes very important, because the access to leadership of any kind comes from influencing people, and influencing happens only when you are expressing. The best thing you can do to avoid failure is to stop expressing. When you don't play the game, there is no risk of losing it. And I think that becomes the number one barrier then.
That's right. So this vicious loop, which is there, which I earlier mentioned, of about having sort of failure, experiencing pain, then going through a round of shame, and then feeling guilty. How do you break that? One thing which comes to my mind is, at the root itself, if we take out the air out of failure, I think the cycle breaks then and there itself. But we have built that cycle over a period of time, and it has become a natural behavioral trait of us, in generally speaking. And therefore, with failure, an association of fear also comes. And therefore, the ship never sails, it's always at shore.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the other thing which can be also added is the story you tell about that whole thing to yourself. I think what story you tell to yourself matters a lot, because now, like the way we take created this story of you and I connecting every week to discuss these topics, to bring new ideas, to bring new frameworks, and play around like a toy. We play around those ideas, we get insights for both of us, and we go ahead from there. Of course, the people who are watching, listening to this, they also get some ideas and they may find it valuable. But then we are not stopping by the number of listeners or the number of views which we get on this. Now, that's our story. Honestly speaking, that's a story. Is it a success or a failure? Of course, in the world of YouTube, in the world of podcast, it is a failure, one can say. If we look at the number of views, if we look at the number of spread of the episode, one may say that it's a failure. And should we then act again or not? That depends on what story we tell ourselves. We have created an empowering story which keeps the show going on.
And if we are creating our own game, then why not create our own rules? So if we measure by the number of views, then probably yes, we are a failure. But if we measure by the opportunity we get to connect and converse on week basis, last 3 weeks you were traveling, but then today, right after the recording, I'm also looking forward to hear your stories, exchange my stories. I went somewhere and I want to share that as well. Just connecting week on week basis. And just also when I'm editing this podcast or just putting it on YouTube, there are a lot of things which I'm learning, and you're also contributing in terms of many other aspects. And those exchanges which happen, I think if we measure by that, then it's a complete different game. And therefore, I
It's
feel
a
that
huge
the
success.
context
It's a
determines.
huge success then.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm just not using the term success, but what I'm also trying to
No, I'm
see
just
is, Hmm. yeah,
Yeah. No, I was just trying to counter it. Like when we say failure, the same way I'm saying, then in the opposite way, if you look at it with a different angle,
absolutely.
then it is a completely a different story altogether. So
Yeah.
the one quick mantra which we can have for dealing with whenever failure occurs or with the guilt and shame associated with that is, when we are taking that action, whatever activity we are doing, a very simple question can be, are we enjoying that? Are we liking and loving that process? I think that itself gives a lot of openings. And if you are enjoying, then okay, like as I said, in case of sports person, they enjoy the process. That is more important for them. So
Absolutely.
it doesn't matter, one day they will win, one day they will lose, but they are actually having fun. Nothing else they can do other than a runner running for the rest of their running career. They don't have anything in their mind to do.
Absolutely. And one other thing which is coming up or opening up for me in this conversation is that it matters how you look at your situation and the context through which you measure yourself. If you measure yourself, in our case, through numbers, then it can only dishearten us. We will also rate ourselves as failures, and it can take us nowhere. If we have to measure ourselves with the number of times we connect with each other, even when we are traveling, and what we get to do, and in the process, when once in a while somebody listens to us and calls back and shares their experience or adds something more to that, it only adds to our knowledge or to our understanding of life. And in that context, yes, like you rightly said, it is then a great success. And it is imperative to really look through the right lens, therefore. I think that is what is opening up for me in the conversation. Any final thoughts, Prasanna, before we complete this conversation?
Yeah, I just want to be very authentic with what we are speaking, so that one may question then, so what work they do, what kind of earning they have through their job or anything, how do they look at that? I think there it is very clear that your purpose is to do that earning. So if that is the intention there, then you will be focusing on that. And of course, even there is no harm in asking the question, are you enjoying it? Because the moment you start enjoying your occupation or profession or vocation, whatever we want to call, I think it will only enhance your performance, and that may or may not result into monetary gains, but there is a huge possibility that it may result into monetary gains.
True. And one thing which I would also like to clarify is it's not spinning a good mindset and just to see everything as success. I'm not saying, because for us, the podcast is not the source of income. The purpose of podcast is something else. So
Yes, that is
we
why I
don't
wanted to
have to
clarify.
associate with the conventional number game. But if the purpose of podcast is making money, then yes, then we have to also acknowledge failure and not really give any significance to that. Failure is a part and parcel. Every time we also fail to put our podcast on time, it's a failure regardless of whether we had the opportunity to connect or not. It's because we have not been aligned to our commitment. But one should also be learning to deal with failure. That's the point of it. Not always throw a positive spin on our failures and then assume that we are still successful.
Correct.
So one thing
Correct.
which
Absolutely. So my last thought.
just to complete is from my side is, one thing is we have to be clear of our measurements. We should not always be looking through the conventional measurements for our measuring our failure or success. And even if then we are failing, then we should take actions in alignment to the measurements that we have set, not to the norms that the society demands.
I completely agree with you. I think from my side, the one point which I would add is that, as you rightly said, the intention is to make sure that we keep taking action and the fear of failure doesn't stop us from acting. I think that's the key takeaway for me.
I think at that note, we will complete our today's conversation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.